I spent 3 days preparing what I thought would be the first real Christmas dinner with my family in years. I chose the perfect dress, booked the most beautiful table, and imagined laughter filling the room again. But instead, I sat alone at a table for 6 tears, blurring my vision as strangers whispered around me. My children called with sweet excuses, pretending to care while secretly gathering at another restaurant just blocks away to plot how to take everything my husband left me. That was the moment I realized the people I gave everything to saw me as nothing more than a burden standing in their way. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 67 years old, and until that night I thought I'd done everything right as a mother. I thought love, sacrifice, and putting your children before yourself guaranteed a family that stayed close. But here I was on Christmas Eve, sitting alone at a table set for 6 in the most expensive restaurant in town, my hands folded neatly in my lap as strangers glanced over with pity. The linen tablecloth felt too white, the candles burned too brightly, and the silence around me was deafening in a room full of laughter and clinking glasses. It was supposed to be our first real holiday together in years. I'd spent 3 days planning this dinner, calling each of them to confirm, making sure the restaurant had the best wine and enough space for everyone to feel at home. I'd even picked out a new dress, a navy blue one that Harold, God rest him, used to say made my eyes sparkle. I wore the pearls he gave me on our 40th anniversary, fastening the clasp myself that afternoon, even though my hands shook. But the shaking wasn't from excitement. I knew even then something was wrong. The first call came just as I was leaving the house. Sarah's voice was sticky sweet, the way it always was when she wanted me to forgive something. Mom, I'm so sorry. Emma isn't feeling well, and we really shouldn't risk her getting anyone else sick. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but forced my voice to stay steady. Of course, honey. I understand. Then Michael called. He was stuck at the office on some big deal he couldn't walk away from. Then David. Car trouble, he claimed, stranded on the interstate. Each excuse was more transparent than the last, and each one left me colder than before. It didn't take much to figure it out. I pictured them all together, somewhere else eating and laughing, grateful that I wasn't there to spoil their fun. I could see Sarah telling the others how she'd handled me, how I'd taken it graciously like I always did. I imagined them raising glasses to toast themselves and not even giving me a second thought. But what was I supposed to do? Stay home alone? I'd already paid for the table. I'd already dressed up. So I drove here anyway and told myself I didn't care what anyone thought. The hostess gave me a strange little smile when I said it would just be me tonight. I could tell she wanted to offer a smaller table to spare me the embarrassment, but I shook my head. No, I told her. Leave it as it is. Now, the empty chairs stared back at me like a cruel joke. I ordered a bottle of Bordeaux, the kind Harold used to love. The waiter was kind enough not to say anything when he saw the single glass. The appetizers arrived, filling the table in a sad attempt to make it look full. Every bite was like ash in my mouth, but I forced myself to eat. It was worse when I looked up and saw the family at the next table. 3 generations crammed into a booth, laughing so hard they cried. A grandmother like me sat at the center of it all, being fussed over her plate already piled high by the others. She smiled so wide, I could feel it crack something inside me. That's when the tears came. At first, just a prickling behind my eyes, then hot streams I couldn't stop. I dabbed at my face with the cloth napkin and pretended to study the menu like it mattered. But the truth was, I wanted nothing more than to crawl under the table and disappear. People were looking now. A few whispered. A man across the room actually shook his head at me, and it took everything I had, not to run right out the door. I'd never felt so unwanted, so humiliated, so completely alone. And the worst part? A small part of me still hoped they'd call, that my phone would buzz and one of them would say they'd changed their mind, that they were on their way after all. I even reached for my phone once just to check, but it stayed dark on the table. So I sat up a little straighter, wiped my face one more time, and took another long sip of wine. If they wanted to leave me here alone, then fine. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of falling apart where they could see it. Not tonight. Not yet. I sometimes lie awake at night and think about all the years I spent trying to be everything my children needed. After Harold died, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. There were 3 young faces watching me, counting on me to hold it all together. So that's what I did. I took the night shift at the hospital laundry because it paid 50 cents more an hour. During the day, I cleaned houses, anything I could find that fit between school drop-offs and dinners. There were months when I didn't buy myself a single new thing, not even a pair of shoes, because Sarah needed a prom dress or Michael needed football equipment. I clipped coupons like my life depended on it, and in a way it did. Every penny went toward tuition accounts, orthodontist bills, saving for their first cars. I packed leftovers into Tupperware and ate them standing over the sink while they sat at the table laughing and scraping their plates clean. Every time I saw them happy, I told myself it was worth it. That's what mothers do. When Sarah came to me with Noah, she was only 22. She told me he was her late cousin's little boy, orphaned, with no one to take him in. I didn't even think to ask questions. I just held out my arms and said of course he could stay with us. He was 2 years old, then shy and quiet, clinging to her leg. It was hard at first, but I didn't care. Another mouth to feed, another child to love. I thought it would bring us closer. I thought she'd look at me and see how much I loved her, how much I wanted our family to stay whole. I let them stay in the house after she moved out, paying for Noah's daycare while she worked. I bought his little clothes, his baby shoes, his first bike. I added his name to every Christmas stocking, put him in every family photo. I called him my grandson without hesitation, because in my heart, that's what he was. I used to tell myself all those sacrifices would mean something someday. That when the kids grew up and had families of their own, they'd look back and see what I did for them. That maybe they'd bring their own children to my table and say things like, "We couldn't have done this without Mom." I pictured big family dinners in this very house. Laughter bouncing off the walls, grandchildren running in circles. I thought love worked that way. You give enough of yourself and it comes back to you in the end. But sitting here tonight, I'm starting to wonder if I was wrong. If maybe all I taught them was that I'd always be here to pick up the pieces. That I'd always give them what they wanted, no matter how it hurt me. I remember the first time Sarah called to tell me she couldn't make it for Thanksgiving. She sounded so casual about it, like it wasn't even a question worth discussing. Then Michael skipping my birthday because he was too busy at work. David forgetting to call on Mother's Day and saying he'd make it up to me next year. I kept making excuses for them, telling myself they were busy with their lives, that they'd show up when it mattered. But now I wonder if I was just lying to myself. I look at Noah sometimes and wonder if he knows how much of my heart I gave him too. I used to catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Like he felt sorry for me. It's a strange thing to feel like a stranger in your own family. To sit at your own table and realize you're the one who doesn't quite belong. That all those years, all those sacrifices might have meant nothing at all. Maybe that's the cruelest part of it. I didn't want riches. I didn't want praise. I just wanted to feel loved the way I'd loved them. To feel like a mother who mattered. Now I wonder if I ever did. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, all the signs were there plain as day. Little cracks that I smoothed over, words I pretended not to hear, glances I chose to ignore. Sarah was the first to change, though I told myself it was just the stress of motherhood. She'd come by and barely sit down before asking about money for Emma's braces or some unexpected bill. I'd nod and write the check without even looking her in the eye, because I didn't want to see the impatience there. Michael used to at least call me Mom with a smile in his voice. Lately, every conversation started with a problem at work and ended with him sighing about how hard it was to keep his business afloat. He'd slip in a request, always framed as temporary, always something he'd pay back. Of course, he never did. David was more direct. He'd text me in the middle of the night about overdue payments or his car breaking down again. He'd promised to visit, but weeks would go by before I saw his face. And when he did show up, it was only to take, never to give. At first, I told myself they were just busy, that raising families and building careers took everything out of them, that I shouldn't expect too much. I'd smile and tell them I understood when they canceled plans or forgot my birthday. I even convinced myself I believed it, but little by little it started to sting. The way they all seemed to have time for each other, but not for me. The way they'd exchange glances when I said something sentimental like I was being silly or dramatic. I remember the way Sarah looked at me last summer when I said how much I missed having everyone together at the lake house. She barely glanced up from her phone and said maybe next year, her tone so flat it left me cold. Michael once called me from his office, his voice sharp as he told me he was too busy to talk. He said he'd call back later. He never did. And David, my baby, actually rolled his eyes at me when I asked him to stay a little longer one evening. He laughed and said he had a poker game to get to, as though I were being unreasonable just for wanting his company. I started to notice how every visit seemed to have a price. They'd sit at my table and eat my food, but the conversation always circled back to what they needed from me. A loan, a favor, a signature. Even Noah seemed to notice. He'd watch me with this sad kind of look when the others were here, like he knew something I didn't. He never said a word, but I could feel it in his silence. There were nights I'd lie awake and replay it all in my mind, wondering if this was just how children were. If every mother felt like this eventually, like she'd given everything only to be left with nothing but polite smiles and empty chairs. I told myself they loved me in their own way, that someday they'd grow out of this phase and come back to me. But the truth is, I started feeling more like an ATM than a mother. They never asked how I was managing, never noticed when my hands were too stiff to write the checks or when my knees ached climbing the stairs. Never cared enough to look past what I could give them to see who I was. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was all of them stacked up over the years like stones. And tonight, sitting alone at that table, I felt the weight of every single one. I was just pushing my fork through a piece of overcooked salmon when the doors to the restaurant burst open. At first, I thought it was just another family arriving late to their reservation until I saw him. Noah. His hair was windblown, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his coat hanging open as though he'd run the whole way. He scanned the room, his eyes finding mine almost instantly. For a moment, he just stood there, catching his breath, and then he weaved his way between tables, ignoring the hostess calling after him. When he reached me, he dropped into the chair beside me and pressed a manila envelope onto the table. His hands were trembling. I stared at the envelope without touching it. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to Emma, but the look in Noah's eyes told me this was something else entirely. He glanced over his shoulder, like he was afraid someone had followed him. Then he leaned close and whispered something that made my stomach drop. "They're all together," he said, "right now, at Romano's." I blinked at him confused. Romano's, that little Italian place 2 streets over. He nodded his jaw tight. They've been planning it for weeks. I felt my breath hitch in my throat, planning what? Noah pushed the envelope closer to me. His voice was low, almost a growl now. This. I picked it up with shaking hands and slid my finger under the flap. Inside were several sheets of paper stapled and stamped, some of them with official-looking letterheads I didn't recognize. At the top of the first page was my husband's name, Harold Holloway. Last will and testament. I kept reading, though my vision was starting to blur. It was a copy of his will dated 6 months before he passed. And every line made it clear that I was his sole beneficiary. The house, the lake property, the investments, all of it left to me. I looked up at Noah, my voice barely audible. "Why are you showing me this?" He swallowed hard. "Because they're trying to take it from you." I froze. I couldn't have heard him right. "They're meeting with a lawyer tonight, Grandma. That's what they're doing over there. They want to contest the will. Say you're too old, too confused to handle it yourself." I just sat there staring at him, the words sinking in one by one. Contest the will. Too old. Too confused. Noah kept talking, his words tumbling out now like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "They've been talking about it for months, saying you'd probably just waste the money. That you didn't need the house. That it would be better if they divided everything now before you did something irresponsible." I dropped the papers onto the table and pressed a hand to my mouth. My ears were ringing. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I thought of all the phone calls earlier that day, the sweet but hollow tone in Sarah's voice, the way Michael avoided my questions, the way David rushed off the line. It was all a lie, every word of it. They hadn't just abandoned me tonight. They'd planned to. I could feel my cheeks burning, my pulse pounding in my ears. Around me, people were still laughing, still raising their glasses in holiday cheer. But it all sounded muffled now, like I was underwater. I looked at Noah and saw his eyes shining with something that broke my heart even more. Pity. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. "I couldn't let them do this to you." I pulled my hand back and sat up straighter, trying to steady myself. But inside, everything was spinning. All these years, I thought my children saw me as the glue that held this family together. But now, I saw it clearly. To them, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just in the way. An obstacle. My stomach churned as I imagined them sitting around a table, just like this one. Their heads bent together, their voices low-plotting how to tear apart everything Harold and I built. It was like watching my whole life unravel thread by thread. And the worst part was knowing that none of them had hesitated. Not one of them had thought to stand up for me. Not one of them except Noah. I picked the envelope back up and held it to my chest, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. My mind kept going back to that table at Romano's, to the laughter I was sure they were sharing right now. They thought I was weak. They thought I wouldn't fight. But as I sat there feeling the sting of tears in my eyes and the heaviness in my chest, something inside me shifted. They had made one mistake. They'd underestimated me. I sat there, gripping the envelope to my chest, trying to calm the storm raging inside me when Noah spoke again. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it cut through my thoughts like a blade. "Grandma, there's something else you need to know." I turned to him, confused by the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. His hands fidgeted on the edge of the table, and I noticed how pale he'd gone since he first rushed in. For a moment, I thought he was about to tell me the plan was worse than I imagined. But the words that came out of his mouth were something I never saw coming. "I'm not really your grandson." It took me a second to even process what he'd said. The words didn't make sense in my head. Not my grandson. I blinked at him, waiting for him to explain, my heart suddenly heavy in my chest. He swallowed hard and started to talk. He told me Sarah had adopted him when he was 2, but not the way she'd always claimed. There was no cousin who died, no family tragedy that left him orphaned. Sarah had taken him from a private arrangement, knowing full well he wasn't related to us by blood. And she'd lied. She'd lied because she knew how much Harold and I would do for a child we thought was family. I felt my hands go cold as he kept talking. He said Sarah coached him, told him what to say, taught him to call me Grandma, and to always make sure he said thank you when I bought him things. He said she used him as a way to pull at my heartstrings, to make sure the money kept coming. I sat there staring at him, my mouth dry, my heart breaking in a way I didn't even think was possible after everything else tonight. I thought about all the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick. How proud I felt watching him graduate middle school. All the Christmas presents I bought, the birthday cakes I made, the little notes I used to leave in his lunchbox. Every memory of him felt suddenly different now, sharper somehow, like each one carried a hidden hurt I hadn't seen before. But when I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw something else too. I saw the boy who'd run across town on Christmas night just to warn me. The boy who chose to sit here with me while the rest of them schemed behind my back. He wasn't mine by blood, but he was mine. That realization hit me so hard I felt my throat close up. Noah's hands were shaking now. He finally looked at me, his eyes wet. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he whispered. I reached out and covered his hand with mine. His fingers curled into my palm like they'd been waiting for that all along. Bitterness burned at the edges of my heart. I hated Sarah in that moment more than I ever thought I could hate my own child. But underneath the anger was something deeper. A quiet, aching kind of love for this boy who had no reason to be here tonight, except that he wanted to. I took a shaky breath and held his gaze. "Blood doesn't make family," I said softly. "Love makes family." The look on his face told me he understood. And right then, I decided that no matter what came next, Noah would not lose me. And I would not lose him. Not to her. Not to any of them. In a strange way, it felt like the first honest moment I'd had in years. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table with Noah still sleeping on the couch, and stared at the envelope he'd brought me the night before. My hands no longer trembled when I picked it up this time. I called Mr. Landon as soon as his office opened. He'd been Harold's lawyer for decades, a quiet, unassuming man with a sharp mind Harold had trusted completely. When I told him I needed to speak with him immediately, he didn't hesitate. He just told me to come right in. The drive downtown felt different from the night before. My chest was still tight, but now there was something else stirring under the hurt. A steeliness I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd spent years believing that bending and forgiving was what made me strong. But now I understood that strength could also mean standing up and saying enough. Mr. Landon greeted me with a kind smile when I arrived his office lined with shelves of leather-bound books and neat stacks of papers. He led me to a chair and closed the door before sitting opposite me. Then he reached for a thick folder already waiting on his desk. "Harold left me instructions to give you this if the day ever came," he said gently. I took the folder from his hands and opened it. The first page was a letter from Harold written in his neat, slanted handwriting. He told me he'd suspected our children would try something like this, that he'd seen the way they talked about me when they thought he wasn't listening, that he couldn't stand the thought of them taking everything we'd built and turning it into their playground. He'd thought of everything. Page after page laid it all out. Evidence he'd quietly gathered of every loan that was never paid back. Every false claim of hardship followed by big purchases and vacations. Notes from private investigators documenting how they'd spoken about me behind my back. Emails they'd exchanged about pushing me into a home and splitting the money before I was even gone. Mr. Landon explained that Harold had rewritten the will 6 months before his death, leaving everything to me outright with a clause that disqualified any heir who attempted to challenge it. If they contested my competency or the will itself, they forfeited their entire share. I read each line slowly, feeling something hard and steady settle into place in my chest. It was all right here. Every lie, every cruel little scheme, every shred of proof that they were not the people I thought they were. Mr. Landon slid another sheet across the desk. Harold had even set up a trust to protect me if they tried to get control of my finances. It would immediately transfer everything into the care of an independent trustee until the matter was settled. I looked up at Mr. Landon, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my mouth curve into a small smile. I could almost hear Harold's voice in my head, telling me he'd taken care of me, telling me not to let them win. When I left his office an hour later, the morning sun felt warm on my face. My steps felt steady and sure. I was done crying. I was done begging for scraps of love and pretending I didn't see the truth. They thought they'd backed me into a corner. But what they didn't know was that Harold had already handed me the key, and I intended to use it. I told them to meet me at Mr. Landon's office at 3 sharp. I kept my voice calm on the phone, offering no hint of what was waiting for them. One by one, they all agreed, though I could hear the irritation behind their words, like it was an inconvenience to them. I was already there when they arrived. Noah sat quietly beside me, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes watching the door. First came Sarah, breezing in with her usual fake smile, clearly expecting me to cave the way I always had. Michael followed, carrying himself with that same arrogant confidence as though he were already in charge. David came last, looking slightly hungover and nervous, though he tried to hide it. They all sat down across from me, glancing at each other in confusion. I let the silence hang just long enough for them to fidget before Mr. Landon closed the door behind him and took his seat. Then I opened the folder and laid the first document on the table. This, I said evenly, is Harold's will, the one you've been scheming to contest. Sarah's smile faltered. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowing. David let out a small laugh like he thought I was joking. I slid another page across the table. This is the clause you didn't know about. The one that says any heir who tries to challenge the will or my competency forfeits their share. They all froze. Michael was the first to speak, his voice rising. You can't be serious. I met his eyes and said nothing. Sarah reached out and put her hand on mine, her voice suddenly sweet and pleading. Mom, we were just trying to make sure you were okay. We didn't mean to upset you. I pulled my hand back. David's laugh was gone now. He looked from Sarah to Michael and back to me. You're really going to do this after everything we've done for you? That's when something inside me snapped. I leaned forward and spoke slowly so they would all hear me. After everything you've done for me, you've lied to me. You've stolen from me. You've sat in this very office and plotted how to take everything your father and I built. And now you want to sit here and play the victim? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. Michael's hands balled into fists on the table, his face turning red. David just stared at me, his mouth hanging open. I kept going, my voice steady, my heart hammering in my chest. You have all disqualified yourselves, every single one of you. The money, the house, the lake property, it's gone. None of it will ever belong to you. Sarah's tears spilled over. She shook her head, whispering that this couldn't be happening. Michael slammed his hand on the table and demanded I come to my senses. David finally found his voice, begging me to reconsider. But I just sat back in my chair and let them flail. I told them I'd already signed everything over to myself and locked it down tight, just like Harold wanted. I told them I was done being their ATM. I told them they had made their choices, and now they could live with the consequences. Sarah sobbed. Michael cursed under his breath. David sank into his chair and stared at the floor, and I felt nothing but relief. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. I gathered the papers back into the folder and looked each of them in the eye. This meeting is over, I said. Then I walked out of that office with Noah at my side, leaving their stunned silence behind me. It's been 6 months since that day at Mr. Landon's office, and every morning I wake to the sound of water lapping against the shore. The lake is calm and silver in the early light, and for the first time in my life, so am I. The house feels bigger now, but it's not empty anymore. Noah lives here with me in the little guest cottage we built together that spring. He painted the trim himself dark green to match the trees and planted flowers along the walkway that are already blooming. I watch him sometimes from the porch, his hands covered in dirt, his face focused, and I feel something in my chest that's quiet and full. Most of the money is gone now, but it doesn't bother me. I gave it where it was needed, to the women's shelter in town, to the children's library, to the hospital that took care of Harold when he was sick. Seeing my name on the donation plaques makes me smile. It feels better than any check I ever wrote to my children. The neighbors stop by often, bringing pie or books or just themselves. Margaret from next door sits with me some evenings, and we talk about flowers and birds and the weather like we've known each other forever. Even Dr. Harris, the town physician, comes by once a week to check my blood pressure and stay for dinner. It's not the family I thought I'd have at this age, but it's a family all the same. They show up, they care, and not one of them has ever asked me for a thing. Noah and I eat dinner on the porch most nights, watching the sun set over the water. He talks about his classes and his art, and sometimes he just sits in silence with me, both of us content to watch the sky change colors. I feel free here in a way I didn't know was possible. There's no more pretending, no more begging to be loved, no more sacrificing myself just to keep someone else happy. Sometimes I still hear their voices in my head, the way Sarah cried, the way Michael shouted, the way David hung his head. But it fades faster now, replaced by the sound of Noah laughing from across the yard, or the breeze moving through the trees. This life, this quiet, honest little life by the lake, is mine. It may have taken me nearly 70 years to claim it, but it's mine, and I intend to live every moment of it on my own terms. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven them and let it go? Or would you have stood your ground like I did? I've thought about that question so many nights, and even now, I wonder what others would choose. I hope you'll tell me. Leave me a comment and share your story, because I know I'm not the only one who's felt betrayed by the very people they trusted most. Sometimes it helps just to say the words out loud. What I learned through all of this is something I'll carry with me forever. Family is not about blood. Family is about love, loyalty, and the people who choose to show up when it matters. That is what I have now, and it's more than enough.